Welcome back to Beyond Sunday. We've got a great guest and a great topic today. Pastor Marty this weekend spoke about the generations and what it is to be a generational church, how that in many respects it's more difficult to be multi-generational than it is to be multi-ethnic or multinational. We're going to talk about that a little today with somebody that knows quite a bit about humans and the way they interact, Dr. Mark Cortez from Wheaton College. And tell us a little bit more about what you do and where you come from.
Sure, Sean. Thank you very much for having me here. I am at Wheaton College. I'm the dean of the Litfin Divinity School now, so I spend most of my time doing administrative-related things.
Okay.
I am a professor of theology, so I do love teaching and talking about theology in pretty much any context. I'm a former youth pastor, and so I do like to talk about what it means to be human developmentally from kind of the teen years on. So I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, and it was the perfect topic to have you here for. I think maybe God ordained that, saw that beforehand when you and I were talking about doing this together. But you've written on Christological anthropology and how our view of Christ, our understanding of who he is, forms our understanding of who we are as people. And of course, Calvary, we talk a lot about the Imago Dei. Just before we get into this generational thing, could you just set a little context for us in that regard?
Yeah, so really quickly on Christological anthropology, which is a lot of syllables, I'm very aware of that. Long and short of it is just does our understanding of who Jesus is have any significant bearing on what we think it means to be human and to flourish as human persons? And I do think as Christians, we talk a lot actually about what it means to be human, even if we're not always aware of it. Like whenever we're talking about parenting or discipling or pastoring or teaching or counseling, like all of those have to do with forming humans in some way, shape, or form. I feel like we talk a lot about that without always connecting it directly to who do we think Jesus is and what do we think Jesus was doing in the world. And so really, I'm just wanting to bring those two things together. Whenever we're talking about anthropology, whenever we're talking about, we should be talking about Jesus.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we do here on Beyond Sunday. We dig a little deeper into the message, to the theology that's behind it. A lot of these things that we do as a church are just taken for granted as it's a program to have a program. No, there's a reason behind it. And we want to help people to think more critically and theologically about the things they believe and the things they do. Richard Middleton, in a book on the Imago Dei, actually from Genesis 1, he kind of supports the worldview hypothesis. One of the things he says is that either consciously or subconsciously, humans reproduce the character in their actions, the character of whatever they sense, whatever they're oriented toward. Of course, he would call it their God. He just kind of makes that statement that what we believe about God actually plays out in how we see ourselves and how we treat other people. And we're looking at all the things that happen that divide people, and yet Christ is the great unifier. We see that at Calvary when we talk about the Missio Dei, the Imago Dei, connecting, that it's really Christ that's our center. He is the one around which we can unite and avoid all these other things that seek to destroy and divide. Technology, though, is not necessarily amoral. It plays a role, and Jean Twenge, you're pretty familiar with her, but has written some on generations and how technology forms these gaps, and why one generation has a little bit of a hard time understanding the next generation, and yet we have a responsibility to pass on faith to the next generation that doesn't think like us, doesn't function like us, have the same necessary values, but something's being reproduced in them, but something's being reproduced in them from us. What are some ways that we can be more intentional about reproducing faith in the next generation across some of these things that may be barriers to human development in a unified manner?
That's a great question. I mean, one of the things I'd want to say first is, this question of how to hand faith on from one generation to the other and why it's difficult is a conversation that has been with us for a very long time.
Absolutely.
So we have a tendency to get a little bit kind of narrowly focused on the challenges that we're facing and fail to appreciate that we have wrestled with this. So I would encourage people to actually kind of dig into their tradition and think about how has my church tradition thought about what it means to pass on the faith to the next generation, and what can I learn from those who have come before. But I don't want to downplay. I mean, we do have some distinctive challenges in the modern world with the rapid pace of change from one generation to the next. So I want to acknowledge that, even while saying this isn't sort of a new thing.
An old thing expressed in a new way.
A new way, absolutely. It's a great way to put it. But I wish I had something super wise that was going to make this really easy for everybody. I'm a big fan of generations spending intentional time together. And that's a lot of what got me into youth ministry in the first place. And not wanting the youth ministry of the church to be a replacement for what the family ought to be doing, but a supplement and a partner in that process. So that youth are spending intentional time with Christians from other generations outside the home family unit. As important as that is, again, I want to replace it, but kids need more than that if they're going to flourish, and particularly if they're going to flourish in increasingly complicated times. And so I want to encourage that, and then encourage the older generations, whether you're 25 or 65, to be to step out and be a little less intimidated by the prospect of just having an intentional and meaningful conversation with the next generation, which I would say they desperately need. I think we desperately need.
Yeah.
We talk about what they have to gain from that conversation, which is true. I think we downplay what we have to gain from that, and that we can only be a healthy, flourishing church if we're having those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, and that's what we want to be, a church of, as Pastor Marty said it yesterday, Abraham's, Isaac's, and Jacob's. Of course, the beginning of our story of faith begins with Genesis, and the story of our heritage, faith, in religion and theology. A book of generations. Literally, one of the organizations of that is around the word generations, the generations of, and it begins with the creation, and then the establishment of all these just family lines: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and then the New Testament begins the same way. We get the genealogies of Christ, and of course, generation was super important. But I love what you're saying, that not only do we have something to give, we have something to gain. One of the recent Barna polls is showing, that Gen Z is actually making up a large portion of church attendance right now. They're, as far as what would be considered regular attendance, they're actually even attending more than their parents' generation. How important is it? You said the word traditions, and my mind goes back to Fiddler on the Roof, tradition. But the idea in the Hebrew faith, tradition mattered, and Pastor Marty talked about Joshua when they crossed over the Jordan, bringing these stones out of, and perhaps there's two monuments there, one in the river and one at the side to draw your attention to the one in the river. Not sure how it all worked, but he had them carry these stones that were big enough to put on your shoulder and build a monument. And the reason, he said, was when your kids ask, you tell them. How important are things, you mentioned our church tradition, our church faith, knowing what we've believed and what ground we've already covered, whether it's in the creeds or even in recent church history. Know the history of your own local church. How did it get founded? Why is it there? Or are you just attending because it was available? How important are those traditions? And even, I would say, liturgy. How important are the sacraments? How important are these things that we can do and begin to teach our kids so that they start to ask, why are we doing this? And then we can then share, but not just share from a sense of, hey, we're going to teach you, but from your childlike receptivity of faith, we have something to learn too. So a mutual give and take. What role might traditions play in that?
Yeah, so I don't know about you. I grew up in a church tradition that didn't like the word tradition, right, which always complicates this conversation. But really, I mean, you think the word tradition really just comes from the concept of handing something over, passing something along. So I have something valuable, and I want to make sure that I hand it on to you or to the next generation or really anybody else, because I think this thing is worth preserving. And there's a legitimate nervousness in there, right? I need to be careful when I'm calling this thing valuable and passing it on to you and asking you to cherish it and pass it on to somebody else. I need to make sure that there's good stuff in there, like I'm passing on the right things. But just the concept of a tradition, that there is something of value worth preserving, and therefore I ought to carefully and intentionally hand it on to somebody else who will cherish it and value it and pass it along. So that, like, that's something that we as humans, but certainly as Christians, ought to be deeply appreciative of and kind of ready to get on board with.
Yeah.
So I absolutely think that the idea of tradition and church tradition is fundamental to what it means to be involved in the mission of God and helping prepare the next generation to participate in that work. But I do want to say, as you kind of picked up on, I think we have a tendency to view this as a bit of a one-way traffic, where the smart older people hand on the important stuff to the not so smart younger people.
Right.
And I hang out with really smart younger people all the time, and so I'm constantly asking us to embrace and recognize how much we have to receive in this, so that there actually is a bit of a handing back. Right. So I hand on and then they hand back. And I get to learn when they hand it back to me, because if we've done it well, it's still the same cherished, valuable thing.
Wow.
But it has been slightly reshaped when it gets handed back to me. And then I get to appreciate that as I kind of look for somebody else to then kind of hand it on once again.
Yeah, man, that's so good. We had a video this weekend of a young lady, I believe around 14 years old, just who experienced a calling into ministry, and was sharing that with everyone, which is very brave, very bold. But we're definitely affirming this generation and the role that they have, not just for the future of faith, but in the present for faith. And we're wanting to really build, as a church, a more generational mindset, that we have a role to play in one another's lives. And certainly, young people to see the value of the gray hairs, so to speak.
Yep.
But then also for us to make space and give opportunity for that receiving back. And I'm trying to think if I can come up with a better term. I don't think I've got a better term, but I think this thing of value that we have is the gospel. I think that this thing that we pass on and then get handed back is what God has revealed in the person of Christ and the work of Christ. And for some reason, God has chosen to speak through prophets. He's chosen to speak through his word, which we now have canonized and can receive from tradition as well. He chose to speak through Christ, and now he keeps speaking through us through his Spirit. And so this passing on is something he's entrusted to us as people. There's a human aspect of this, that it's situationally located, culturally located human beings that are not only receiving this, and we didn't come to it ourselves, as to your point, we received it from elsewhere as well. And we need to accept that humility and double check, did we receive the right thing, or did we get passed on some biases and some things that were of the culture or of our parents that weren't so healthy? And then how then do we go back to the church, and what a huge role the church has to play in helping guide where that thing of value, that true faith, might have been misguided by the actions, the just brokenness that we have as human vessels broken vessels in whom God has entrusted this immeasurable treasure. Just as a closing thought, as a matter of human development, God chooses to put in people this responsibility to reach forward and back, down and up, to carry this gospel that alone is the hope of the world. And he's entrusted that to us. What's a closing thought on how we can faithfully accept not only that responsibility, but that joy and that worship in the way that we engage cross generations?
Well, I do love the idea that this whole idea of kind of passing along the gospel is something that God has entrusted to people, which means it's inherently storied. Right? There's a history of God giving it to us, and then us responding, hopefully faithfully at times, sometimes unfaithfully, and kind of appreciating and understanding all of that. So that as we're articulating this vision to the next generation, that what we're handing on to them, when we're talking about handing on the gospel, which is absolutely, I think it is a great way and a necessary way of envisioning it, it isn't just a set of ideas or a set of truths, right? We're handing on an opportunity to be invited by the God of the universe to be used by him and participate in this history, this story of him being at work through his gospel people to accomplish his gospel purposes in the world. If we can't pass that on with joy and be excited about the opportunity that we have to invite another generation into that sort of thing, I mean, something is desperately wrong if that just didn't make our hearts beat a little bit faster and get excited about the opportunities there.
Yeah, great thoughts. And I just want to thank you guys again for joining us. We'll continue these conversations. You know, the Missio Day always seems to find its way into this. What is God doing in the world? What's he doing in me? How do we interact with that? And so thank you, Dr. Cortez, for joining us today. Hope you had fun. Thank you guys for joining us. Continue to like, follow, share. Send us your questions, your feedback. We do read that. We appreciate it. And until then, just continue to see yourself as part of a generation that has a responsibility to every other generation around you. Storied learning, storied living the story of Christ. We want to help you find your story and God's story and to share that in a way that can bring hope to people around you. Have a great week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.